probably heard of some of these things. Maybe you know something about it. Maybe you're really wondering about some of these things. Last time we talked about queer theory. That was a heavy topic. Having a lot of influence on the way that people think about sexuality, and we wanted to think about it from a biblical perspective, so we talked about that. And I mentioned critical theory. All of these words are kind of flying around, and they don't have a whole lot of context other than the context that we're giving, and they may be confusing. So now we're talking about critical theory. What the heck is that? We just talked about queer theory. I do next time want to talk about critical race theory. What are all these terms? Well, hopefully this will be clarifying, because going forward, I'd like to talk about these different things, and as we go through these heavy topics, these big questions, I want to talk about racism. I want to talk about anti-Semitism, which is a variety of racism, of course, and maybe a couple other related things, and then we'll move on to a totally different Sunday school topic. But in any case, that's what the notes are. Critical theory. I hope this is clarifying for you. Let me get a microphone and ask someone to pray for us. Is there anyone who might like to pray to get us started? Anyone? Anyone is allowed. Prayer is available to all. Oh, do you want to take it up? You were leaning forward. You didn't even say yes, but we're not feeling very prayerful this morning. Go for it.
Oh, God, Father in heaven, thank you so much that we could be here together this morning, and just pray Pastor Sanjay has a good message for us like he always does, doing an outstanding job. We just love you. We thank you, and amen, Jesus, amen.
Amen. You want to hold on to that, and we'll pass it around as people have questions as we go. Okay, so you've got notes. Hopefully we have enough. All right, critical theory. Critical theory is the philosophy behind so many of the current social identity movements. And the social identity movements would involve things like what we talked about last time, queer theory. Somebody might say, well, I'm queer. You might say, well, what does that mean? It can mean any number of things. It is pretty broad. But they say, this is how I identify. And I navigate the world as a queer person, and that's what you have to know about me. Or I'm transgender, which isn't quite the same as being queer. Queer is a sexuality, or a broad category for sexualities, whereas transgenderism analyzes not sexuality, but gender. So not how you sexually relate to others, but who you are in terms of gender identity. Okay. So if somebody says, well, I'm transgender, I navigate the world as a transgender person, you have to understand that about me. And of course, we know something about this. They'll say, you might see somebody that looks like me, and you might say, well, I think that's a man. And then I insist, no, my pronouns are she, her. And so I say, that's how you have to respond to me. I navigate the world as a transgender person. Where did all this stuff come from? The background philosophy is called critical theory. And critical theory, on the first page you'll see of the notes, says at least 5 things. Here's the first thing that critical theory says, and all of the, you'll see on the back a chart, all of the identity movements fall under one of the types of critical theory, okay? So I'll get to that in a second, but it says this. This is the way that well, let's say Gen Alphas are being absolutely swarmed with these ideas. These are second nature for them, those who are born after 2000. For younger millennials, Gen Zs, this is very influential in their thinking. For anyone a bit older than that, older than millennials and older, this is almost entirely foreign, okay? So it says this, there are a variety of social binaries. You're either this or that. It's very black and white, at least in the traditional way of thinking. Very black and white. You're either this or that. And depending on what side of the line that you're on, you're either an oppressor or you're oppressed. So if everyone were to take a piece of paper and write out their various social identities, you might say, well, I don't know exactly what those are, but if you look at the back side of it, this chart on the back side, you see a list of social identities: gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, post-colonial identity, nationality, class, age, ability. These are just an example. In most critical theory textbooks, you will see probably about 10 to 15 different social identities. So given each one of those identities, you're either an oppressor or you're oppressed. So with regard to gender, the oppressor class, you see there, I'm looking at the backside on the table. The oppressor class is the cis man. The cis man. Cis means same. So it means your biological sex matches your gender identity. I'm a cis man, biologically male, and I am a man. I act as a man. I think as a man. If somebody calls me a woman, I'm offended. Okay? So there you go. I'm a cis man. The idea is, therefore, at least on that one identity, I'm an oppressor. And I stumble through the world just sometimes inadvertently oppressing everyone else who's not a cis man. That would include women and transgenders and anything else. And the reason is, on the first page, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth, I benefit from what they call ideological hegemony. Okay, so that's the third point. I've got a whole paragraph there. Okay, there's a lot to it. What that means is the system works in my favor. It just works for me. The system just works for men. The system does not work for women. And again, I just stumble through the world just blissfully happy with the way that things work, and women kind of have an uphill battle. It's like a treadmill, an uphill treadmill that's going in the wrong direction, or trying to walk up an escalator going in the wrong direction. The escalator, for me, is going in the right direction, and I take a step, and it's moving me upwards. But for women and everyone else, they're fighting the downward escalator, going twice as fast just to keep pace. Does that make sense? So that's the idea. These are some of the fundamental tenets. You might say, that doesn't sound like the craziest idea ever. A lot of people have an idea like that. But we can break ourselves down into any number of social binaries, and if you are on the winning side, if you're on the side for whom the system works for you, then you benefit from the reigning ideology. You just benefit from the way that the world is, and you don't even know it. You don't even think twice about it. And those who don't benefit from it, they just suffer. And they just don't experience the world in the same way. There are minor ways in which this might be true. If it's late at night and I have to go, my car is in a parking lot, I have to go to the parking lot to get my car, I don't think too much about the dangers. It doesn't occur to me that the world I know that the world is not the safest place, and pretty obvious dangers I want to be aware of, but I'm not really scrutinizing the environment all that much. There's a possibility that there's something dangerous, but the chances are usually pretty low. If I know where I am, it's late at night, no one else is around, I'm in a parking garage, okay. Women probably approach that situation a bit differently, knowing that the world is not as safe for them as it may be for me. Does that make sense? Yeah. That would be a minor example of where that's not really crazy at all, but what we're going to do is we're going to push these ideas as far as we can. So that third bullet point there is the idea that I just benefit from that, and I just don't even think twice about it. I just stumble through the world just assuming this is how the world works, and you're like, does it need to work that way? Can it work in a different way? Can it work in a way that helps me or benefits me a little bit? Because it always seems to benefit you. Okay, so that's the idea. I'll just jump down to the fourth point. I know I skipped the second point. I'll come to that in a second. So we can all be broken up into a series of social binaries. Those who are in the oppressor class benefit from ideological hegemony, the idea that the world just works for you and you don't really care if it doesn't work for others. And the fourth point down says we need to address that problem, and here's how we address it. If you're in the oppressed class, like if you're a woman, I'm talking about cisgender men before, if you're a woman and we're talking about sexism, we should privilege women's voices in that conversation. We should not privilege men's voices because men don't get it. They don't see the problem in the same way that women do. Does that make sense? Again, probably not the craziest idea at all. But again, we're going to push it to its extreme. We're going to go so far in some cases to say, if you are a man on this question, you have no voice at all. Don't want to hear it. So, for example, in the abortion debate, no uterus, no opinion. No uterus, no opinion. Now, on the contrary, I have every right to speak on the moral status of abortion, whether I have a uterus or not. So it's actually quite unfair to say no uterus, no opinion, because it's not merely an issue of sexism. Even if it were merely an issue of sexism, I can still weigh in on it. I shouldn't just stumble into it like I know everything and I have the universal perspective and everyone has to listen to me. That would be arrogant. But on the other hand, it's not entirely about sexism. It is about the status of human life, for which I have every right to weigh in. But this standpoint epistemology says, unless you are in a minoritized or oppressed class, you have no right to speak on the issue. You have to be quiet. And those people who recognize these things, the ideological hegemony, point 3, and standpoint epistemology, have the 5th point, liberatory consciousness, or what we call being woke. When you understand those things, when you understand the system works for some and not for others, and only those for whom the system doesn't work get to speak on these issues, then you're woke. And that's the general idea of wokeness. An example, a good cultural example would be, we're a little bit of an older crowd. Anybody remember the movie Finding Nemo? Okay, yeah. So the kids remember. Joey, was that your favorite when you were younger? One of your favorites, yeah. Not surprised. It's a great movie. Great movie. You remember Bruce the shark? Bruce the shark. He was the friend of fish, yes? Okay. Do you realize Bruce was woke? Bruce understood that the way that the sea works, he was born with a massive privilege. He has power, speed, gigantic teeth. He's a predator. He was born with privilege. What was Nemo's dad's name? Marlin. Was it named Marlin? Okay, Marlin was a clownfish, right? Not power, not speed, not massive teeth. Okay, there's a huge disadvantage there. And so we can't just expect Bruce and Marlin to just compete. So Bruce has to recognize the unearned privilege that he was born with. And he has to understand that the environment benefits him. So that's the ideological hegemony. Sharks are like, well, how is this so hard? Just, bite through it or swim away or something. And the little clownfish says, I don't have all those advantages. I can't do all that stuff. I'm not like you. But also, Bruce has this inward instinct to devour fish. And he realizes he has that. And so he has to listen to the perspectives of non-sharks. And that's the standpoint epistemology, and privilege their voices. And they have counseled him. What did they counsel Bruce? What did he learn when he became woke? What's Bruce's mantra? Fish are friends, not food. Fish are friends, not food. So he counsels himself in that all the time. Fish are friends, not food. And so when that internal instinct to devour his friends comes up and he can't really control it, he reminds himself, fish are friends, not food. So here's the idea that we see in so many cases. We will be told, for example, in the strongest sense, so in the strongest versions of critical theory, we will hear this. If you're white, and I mentioned this last time, you might think, we know what that means. It's not as easy to define what white is as you think. Historically in America, it's largely an American term. It's not a term that goes back to the Bible. You won't find it in the Bible. It's not the way people thought. They didn't have that category. They didn't have white, black. Those weren't categories. It's a very modern category that was somewhat invented, somewhat biological, largely invented, largely evolved over time, and largely colored by the American experience. So historically in America, Italians were not white. They more or less are now, but they weren't. Irish certainly were not white. When they immigrated here, they were not white. And when we talk about racism, we'll talk more about, well, what do you mean Irish weren't white? They've always been white. No, they weren't. and I'll substantiate that, why they weren't, and so forth. But in any case, you generally know what that is. And this is the idea. According to the strongest versions of critical theory, white people, like Bruce, have an internal instinct to socially devour people of color. And so, in order to be woke, you have to counsel yourself, people of color are friends, not food. Does that make sense? So if questions of racism come up and you're white, again, not so easy to define what that is as we might think, but if you're white, be quiet. Allow people of color to speak. Not only allow them to speak, but it would be better if you never spoke in some contexts. For example, look at, there's a whole series, a whole documentary and a whole series on events that happened around Evergreen State University around 2016. It's fascinating. There's probably about 20 videos in which all of this stuff plays out, and you see it happening, and you see all of these things expressed. Does that make sense? And how oppression and being oppressed, they make intentional efforts to reverse the power dynamic. That is to say that we view all relationships, like Norm and I can't just be friends. We can't just be brothers and sisters in Christ. That's not possible according to critical theory. There's always a power dynamic between us. Me being a man and she being a woman, there's already an oppressive power dynamic there, whether I like it or not. So I have to be particularly woke to that, right? And you're Jewish, right? And I'm a Gentile. Well, there we go. We could look at our social identities and say there's a power dynamic there. Now, it depends on how we want to think about that. Traditionally, we would say, Gentiles are oppressive to Jews. Jews are the minority group. So I just sort of stumble through life in this Gentile way and don't respect your Jewishness or something. But if we're anti-Semitic, then you're the problem, right? And you're the enemy or something like that. We're viewing the whole world as a series of power dynamics. There's no true fellowship on this view. So the last thing I'll mention is point number 2, and you've probably heard this term, it's called intersectionality. And intersectionality says if you look at this chart on the back, you can look at all of the identities, and on some of those you're an oppressor, and some of those you're oppressed, and we can kind of give you an overall grade for how much moral worth and how much voice you have depending on these things. You can actually mentally go through this if you want to real quick. Look at the different, on the back page, look at the social identities. So look at the gender, okay? Look at the identities, and then give yourself a -1 if you're in the oppressor class and a +1 if you're in the oppressed class. So that second column is the oppressor class, and the column 4 is the oppressed class. So where do you find yourself? So I'll just grade myself. You can add up your own score as we go. With regard to gender, I am a cis man, therefore I get a -1. I don't even think about it. Just by nature, I'm sexist against women and transgenders and so forth. I just have a privilege, and I just don't even think twice about it. Okay, so I get a -1, -1 so far. With regard to sexual orientation, I'm heterosexual, so I use heterosexism to oppress everybody else, so now I'm at -2. With regard to race, well, my mother's, okay, so this is a hard one for me. My mother's Italian, traditionally not white, but now it is. My father's Indian, definitely not white, but kind of becoming that way. It's hard to say. It's very difficult to say, at least in the American judgment. But I guess I would go very broadly with person of color. So now I get a +1 back. So I'm at -1. Okay, religion, I'm a Christian. I use religious intolerance to oppress non-Christians, so I'm back at -2. Post-colonial identity, oh, good grief, I don't know. Am I a colonizer or am I indigenous? My father immigrated here. I think I'm a colonizer. Not sure. Okay, I'm gonna give myself, I'm at -3. With regard to nationality, I'm a citizen in this country, so I use nationalism to oppress immigrants, so I'm at -4. With regard to class, I'm a capitalist, so I'm at -5. I use classism to oppress the poor. With regard to age, okay, middle-aged. Middle-aged depends on who we're talking to. Some of you would say, oh, we have a young pastor. You're out of your mind. I'm not young, good grief. I spent the last 15 years with 18 to 22-year-olds, so I have no idea. I'm going to call that one a push. I'm right in the middle. Okay, so what was that? -5. And then with ability, able-bodied, I use my ableism to oppress people with disabilities. I say things like, hey, just build some stairs here. And people in wheelchairs are like, can I have access? And I didn't even think of it. Didn't even occur to me. Must be nice. Ableist privilege. So what I end up with, -6, I'm a pretty bad person. Pretty bad person. So when questions of justice arise, I am the last voice that should be heard. And I need to counsel myself. Women and transgenders and so forth are friends, not food. LGBT plus, friends, not food. Non-Christians, friends, not food, and so forth. Immigrants, friends, not food. Anybody else? Did you give yourself a score that you want to share? You got a -7? How's that possible? You at least get a couple pluses on there. You get a gender plus. What? -9. Holy moly, Scott. Yikes. Okay, good. Anything else? All right. Well, so this hopefully explains some things, and I do want to get into the question of, you see on this, one of the questions is race, and I do want to get into the question of racism and how the church, we should address racism. Let me just say, critical theory and what's called critical race theory is not the way. It's not the way. It's not the right way to address it. It doesn't do what the apostles command us to do with regard to questions of race. That is to seek reconciliation, to break down walls of division. This does not do this. What this does is it falsely analyzes walls of division and then reverses the power dynamic. So what it says is, again, to use Norma and myself as a man, I never think of it, but I kind of always have a gun of sexism pointed at her. I don't even think of it. And she's like, would you stop pointing that gun at me? And I'm like, what gun? I'm not doing anything to you, Norma, but I'm always just sort of walking around like this. And she's like, I always feel your subtle sexism, right? Or white person, people of color, subtle racism everywhere we go, and so forth. Or my gender identity. I'm always looking at anyone who's transgender and always pointing a gun at them. This is the idea. I mean, we hear this from the transgender people who say that if you don't affirm this, then transgender people are going to kill themselves. What am I doing to them? The idea is you're always threatening them. How am I threatening them? I hardly ever think of them. That seems to be your issue. It's not my issue. All of a sudden, I become an oppressor just because you say something weird that I never considered? Now I'm a bad person? How could that be? Because the idea is we're always pointing a gun at those people. That's what they say. That's false. That's just false. That's not the way that the world works. It's not just a series of power dynamics. The world is way more complicated than that, and we are way more than that in terms of our relationships to each other. But that's what they say. Now, the fact is, we talked about transgenderism before. There is a huge number of, in terms of percentages of transgender people who do harm themselves and commit suicide. That's true. It's very prevalent in that group. But it's not because of right-wing bigotry. It is because of the underlying mental health disorders that go with transgenderism that become exacerbated through not treating transgenderism with real spiritual and clinical care, but encouraging it. So anyway, they'll use these sort of ideas to say, you always have a gun pointed at us, right? And so we want to reverse the power dynamic. So what we need to do is, for me to become woke, what I need to do, I'm always pointing this gun of sexism, we need to reverse the power dynamic and allow her to punch back at me. I put down my gun, women are friends, not food, and now she gets to punch back at me. She can never be sexist against me. She can say all sorts of things about men, and I can say, you're right. You're right. Oh, men are terrible. Absolutely right. And the more I agree with it, the more woke I show that I am. But she can never be sexist. Why is that? I can be sexist, even unintentionally, just walking through the world being a man. I'm a sexist, but she can never be sexist. It's impossible because she's a woman. She's in the oppressed class. Women can't be sexist. People of color cannot be racist. Christians cannot be non-Christians cannot be religiously intolerant. Indigenous peoples can never be colonial. We're seeing this work out in Gaza right now with the debate about Israel and Gaza. Who's the real colonizer? It turns out that Arabs are the colonizers, and I don't mean that as a criticism. That's the history of the world. Colonialization is the history of the world, but the simple fact is the Levant is not where Arabs come from. They come from the Arabian Peninsula. The Levant was colonized in the last 1,000 years and Arabized by Arabs. The indigenous peoples are, in fact, Jews and other Canaanite peoples. So that whole debate, of course, has arisen. So all of these kinds of issues now fall under this rubric. And so, again, what I want to say is this is not the right way to analyze it. Let me give you an example of the problem of intersectionality. Suppose this. Suppose we're looking for an assistant pastor at the church here. Let's not make it this church. Let's make it another church. They're looking for an assistant pastor, totally different church, and they don't have the wonderful, thoughtful elders that we have. They've got some guys that we're pretty suspicious of. What's up with that guy? And so one candidate comes, and he is a wonderful candidate, and he gives a really good sermon, and here are the duties that you're going to have, and he seems like he's qualified for all of them, and we really like him, and the elders get together and they say, what do you think? Should we recommend this guy to the congregation for consideration? And one of the elders says this. He says, yeah, I really liked him. He seems like a great guy. Here's my problem, though. Problem is he's biracial. And the elders say, what do you mean, Tom? Said, well, he's part white, but he's also part black, biracial. What's the problem, Tom? Just never had a pastor like that here before. So that's just not something that we've ever done. I'm not saying it's bad or wrong. I'm just saying I just don't think people would understand. Okay? What should the elders say to Tom? How should they counsel him? You still have the microphone? Let's get some counsel. Somebody counsel Elder Tom for his comment. Mike's in your hand, brother. Respond to Elder Tom, given what he just said.
Definitely the elders should counsel him on his hang-ups about, why does he feel like, his race or, dictates how he's, his walk, his salvation,
Whether he's a good candidate for a pastor or not.
Right.
Would you say, Tom, that's a racist comment?
Right. Because, when you go to when you go to Timothy, it doesn't say, you can't be black or white or
Absolutely.
Hispanic. So, just go down to the source and just explain to him.
Was Elder Tom's comment racist? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. I'm not trying to cause any confusion here. Yeah, that's clearly a racist comment. To say you're not qualified because of your racial identity is contrary to the gospel. Okay? Simple. It's not a trick question at all. Okay? I saw her testimony when she was asked what a woman is, and being on the political left, she saw it as sort of a hard issue and didn't want to take it on. Yeah, that's part of what. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about those issues personally, but I did see that testimony, and I found it pretty absurd. So if Tom were to say, I don't like it because he's biracial, and then he says, I don't have a problem with it, I just don't think people would understand. I think we would say to Tom, Tom, I do think you have a problem with it. I think you're excusing your racism. I don't think that's true at all. So we would counsel Tom, and we would say, we got a big problem here. Okay, how about this? Suppose it's a totally different situation, and somebody comes in, and he's wonderful, and everybody loves him, he gives a great sermon, and then Tom says, I really liked him, but I gotta say, I do have a concern. What is it? Well, he's bisexual. He's bisexual. What do you mean, Tom? Is he just, sleeping around with men and women? Because we can't have that. No. He's not sleeping around or anything like that. He confesses to be a Christian, and so he doesn't just live a promiscuous life by any means. But he's a single guy, and we were just talking at lunch, and he said, I'd like to get married one day, and I'm bisexual. I might marry a man or a woman. I don't know who I might fall in love with. I'm just open. Now, how should the elders respond to that? Is that, so if Tom were to say that, is he a heterosexist? What do you say? Anybody have a thought? Diane, go for it.
In Genesis, a man is defined as a man, a woman as a woman, and they marry. Genesis describes what we are, not bisexual. A man is for a woman is for a man.
Yeah.
And I would not approve of the candidate.
So I think I saw your head nodding one way or the other with the two questions. In the first case, you think Tom was a racist. He's actually sinning.
Yes.
And needs to be rebuked. In the second case, you agree with Tom and you think he's got the right biblical perspective. He's not sinning, he's giving good counsel.
He is sinning if he's a...
In the second case?
Yes.
I'm talking about Elder Tom, who said we cannot hire a bisexual pastor.
That's a sin also.
Tom is not sinning. The pastoral candidate, by being bisexual.
He is sinning. The pastoral candidate.
Good. Okay. I'm just asking about Tom. He's our imaginary elder, and what I'm asking about is in the first case, his judgment was you can't hire a biracial candidate. That's a sin.
Yes.
You're a racist. In the second case, you can't hire a bisexual candidate. That's good counsel, Tom. Thank you for bringing that up. So in one case, he's making an identitarian discrimination, and it's wrong. In another case, he's making an identitarian discrimination, and it's right. Intersectionality says, this might be very helpful to you. It says that if you sin in one category, you sin in all the categories because you're not woke. You don't get it. You just don't get it. And so a woke church is going to say, of course, not hiring the biracial pastor is racism. Also, not hiring the bisexual pastor is heterosexism. All the sins work together. Go ahead, Jen.
In the biracial, in the Bible, it doesn't say anything about being of color is a sin, but being bisexual is a sin. So in any case, if the church was going to hire an assistant pastor, it's not anything on the outside what they look like. It's what's inside their soul. And so when they start to express their thoughts on things that are contradicting the Bible, then that is not a candidate.
Yeah. The Bible's going to counsel that there are things about us, according to God's design, that are glorifying to God. And there are things about us, according to our sinful behaviors, that are not. And to distinguish those things and to call things that are according to God's design sinful is itself wrong. And to call things according to our sinful behavior good is also wrong. And we mix those things up. Well, if you're in a woke church, they're not going to be ruled by the discriminations that the Bible makes. They're going to be ruled by this chart. And they're going to go with this chart. And this explains a lot for me. I had a student years ago who we were having a conversation, and I was considering whether or not I should vote for Donald Trump. there were a lot of things that I did not like, but I wasn't sure about, and the whole political environment was very noisy. I was sure I wasn't going to vote for the alternative. It was Hillary Clinton. Really sure, and I had real clarity about that because I knew her a lot better. I hardly knew anything about Trump except for his TV show, forgetting the name of it. The Apprentice, yeah, so hardly knew anything about him. So the student said, well, you can't vote for him. I said, okay, tell me why, because I'm trying to learn about this. He said, well, he's a racist. I said, okay, good. Tell me why. I don't want to vote for a racist, for sure. And so then he told me a couple sexist statements that he made. He said, well, can you believe he said this? And then he said that. And I said, wow, I had not heard that before. That sounds really sexist. To this day, I'm not I didn't really look into it. I'm not sure that they're true. I don't think that he was lying to me. And I don't mean to start a political fight. Sorry if this is offensive and you're like, he never said a sexist thing, and I'm sure. Okay, I'm not trying to fight with you because you might know more than me. I'm not saying that I know. But it seemed like, okay, sounds like maybe he said something like that. That sounds terrible. Okay, that gives me a real consideration. And there's just things that he said, around 2016 that just made me go, I don't know. And again, I'm not trying to start a political fight by any means, but just things that were just causing me, because I thought Hillary Clinton sounds really, really bad given her clear statements about her political views. I don't want to endorse those things. But I just kind of wanted to know what Trump was up to. And so anyway, I said, those are really sexist things, it sounds like what he said. Okay. But what about the racism? Because now you've got my curiosity. What did he say that was racist? And the student, he was very sure, and he said, I don't know. He didn't say he didn't know. He said he reemphasized the sexist things because he seemed to know the quotes right off the top of his head. And then he said, well, I mean, just look at how nervous people of color are. They're just so scared that this man might become the president. And I said, yeah, fair enough. I have noticed that, and I'm wondering about it. Should I be worried? I'm really wondering about it. It was very interesting at that time. So this is going back to 2016 before I knew much about critical theory, and I thought, and I had a really good relationship with this student, and so I was just taking that stuff into consideration, and he left, and I just wondered, okay, why would the sexism be evidence of the racism? Well, it's this thinking. It's intersectionality. If you commit one sin, we can lob every accusation at you because you've committed them all, because they hang together. Whereas we said in this church, if somebody wants to say we're not hiring a biracial candidate because, I don't know, I just don't think people will get it, we would say that's racism. But if we say we don't want to hire the bisexual candidate, we'd say, oh, thank you for looking into that issue and for scrutinizing that, because we agree with you. We make that discrimination. So here's how it would go. If an outsider found out that we had a bisexual candidate for some position, and we said, actually, for that reason, we have to decline because we can't endorse that. You might hear outsiders protesting Living Hope Bible Church as a racist church. He's like, where did the racism come from? They will cast every accusation because they all hang together. We saw that last week when I showed you that little paragraph on queer theory. According to the queer theorists, not allowing children to express and exercise their sexual desires is racist. That little quote that I showed you, it's grounded in colonial theories. It's racist. This is just too wild. It's just too much. There's really something demonic behind this. I mean, Satan is the father of lies and the accuser of the brethren, and we're seeing rampant, radical, accusatory stuff. What I showed you on these first 5 points are not so crazy taken in moderation. It's not crazy at all to think that people who have experienced sexism and racism and other forms of bigotry know something about it and can speak with some good advice for people who haven't directly, to their knowledge, experienced it. That's not the craziest idea ever, but again, when you take these 5 things and you push them to their extreme, you see where we get some of this stuff. All right, is that helpful? Anybody have any thought or correction or question? Yes, sir.
Well, from my perspective, in encountering racism from a secular perspective is normal for me. That, you know, whether it's your job or other situations, you encounter people that, you know, express racist opinions. In my job, even at the state police, when I first started, as a trainee, somebody left a note on my desk with a stick figure being lynched. And it was like, wow, what am I getting myself into here? It was just weird. And I went to my supervisor about it, and he said, hey, did they sign the note? How do you know what they meant? That's an assumption. Really? So it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I gotta watch myself. So, but that sort of thing, to me, it's really disheartening when you experience it in the church. Because I had a former pastor who told me, Marcel, and I was a deacon, and he said, Marcel, I could never marry a black person to a white person. And I was floored. I had no clue that this person thought like that. And he was our pastor and newly installed. And I was thinking, man, we blew it. We really didn't ask the right questions when we were talking to this guy.
You mentioned that to me before. I'm just really curious. You don't have to talk more about it. What on earth, what was the context for why he would even want to say that to you? Why wouldn't he just keep it to himself?
Well, because he had expressed that he was a new guy, for example. He was a new pastor we had just hired. And because he was new, me and the other deacon said it would be good for us to take him around and let him meet some of the former members or people who had just kind of strayed away. And so we would, on Thursday night, when we would normally go out visiting, and he agreed. He said, yeah, I would like to meet some of these former members and I can encourage them to come back to the church. And I said, great. And so he and I hopped in the car and we went around and we got to went knocking on doors to people who were formerly members, and he was very engaging and had the Southern charm and, you know, just welcomed them, gave them a little background on himself, and it was really pleasant. I was really impressed until we pulled up next to a house and there was a mixed race couple. She was white, the guy was black. We pulled up, they were out in the front doing yard work, and she was in her scrubs and had on her gloves, and the other guy, he was more in the line or whatever he was doing. And when we pulled up, he saw me and I waved to him and said, hey. And they were preparing to greet us, and this guy, I looked at him, I got out the car, he didn't hop out the car. I said, Pastor, we're here.
Yeah.
He said, is that the couple? I said, yeah. He said, I'm not getting out the car.
Wow.
And it was very embarrassing because I'm stuck. I'm out the car. I'm waving to them. They're expecting us to come up.
Yeah.
He won't get out. He said, Marcel, I'm not getting out this car. I'm sorry. And so I had to wave them down and say, come on down. He doesn't feel like getting out the car. I just want to introduce you. And he was very stern. He was very hi, how you doing? And that was that.
Yeah,
So
that's
later
shocking.
that he came up. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I'm more concerned with the issues in the church than I am outside of the
Absolutely.
church.
And that's
Scary.
Absolutely. That's what Paul says to the church at Corinth. He says, now he's talking about sexual misconduct within the congregation, and he said, separate those people from you. I think we can apply it to racists within the congregation as well. Confront them with their sin. If they won't repent, send them out. And Paul says just what you said. He said, I'm not telling you to judge the whole world. If that were the case, you would have to leave the world. you're going to be surrounded by racism. You're going to be surrounded by sexual impropriety, and that's the world. But within the church, you have to clean house. I do, as I mentioned, we're kind of talking about, we are talking about critical theory now, and one of the issues, the third row down, race, is analyzed, the branch of critical theory that analyzes it is called critical race theory. And I don't think critical race theory is the solution insofar as it is a branch of critical theory. I think it's the wrong analysis of the problem of racism. It's the wrong solution. The Bible gives us a solution. In fact, one of the critical issues in the New Testament church was racism. And people don't realize that. People don't realize that that was one of the critical issues. It didn't have to do with black-white racism, because people, if we went back to the biblical world and said, hey, you know how there's some people who are black and some people who are white? And they would say, nope, we don't know what that is. They just didn't have those categories. Of course, they knew the difference between, an Ethiopian, and they knew Ethiopians very well because it was very much on the margins of the Jewish world, and there was a lot of interaction, and say a Gaul, right? Somebody from Northern Europe. They met those people. They knew them. In Asia Minor, Anatolia, there was a whole Gaulish population. That's where the Galatians come from. They were actually Northern Europeans who emigrated to that area. So they knew the difference. They knew the biological and ethnic differences. They didn't know the racial differences. It did not occur to them. Those were not categories that they had. In the New Testament, their racial categories, at least Peter's racial category, was what? You're either this or that. Like in America, you're either black or white. And for people who are brown, you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? Pick a lane. But not so in the New Testament. If for Peter's world, you were what? You were either Jew or Gentile. Those were his racial categories. And in Acts chapter 10, when God leads him to Cornelius' house, he says, now he thinks he's following the law. So I'm not saying it's just outright racism. He thought that he was following the law. I'm not calling Peter a racist. I'm not going that far by any means. But I am saying it's in the air, and it's the way that people think. And Peter was a party to this to some degree. And he said, I would never have come into a Gentile's house, but the Lord led me here. And then he preaches the gospel to him. And this Italian centurion and his family hear the gospel. They're filled with the Holy Spirit. And Peter says, I now realize that God is a respecter of no man. And that's the traditional translation. And it doesn't mean that God is disrespectful. It means that God does not have partiality. He does not have ethnic partiality. Peter goes, God isn't a racist. That is a very colorful translation of what Peter said. That's not exactly right, but something like that. Oh my goodness, God doesn't have racial preferences. This totally changes the church. And this is a big deal. So when the Judaizers were saying to Gentiles, if you really want to be a Christian, really follow God, you need to be circumcised. You need to become as Jewish as possible. Paul said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. In no way. So racism would say, I don't know if this pastor would say, Marcel, you can be a member of the church, but you have to become as white as possible. Right? Okay, that's racism. That's racism. And it can be difficult for us in the sense that when we see different cultures worshiping the Lord in their cultural ways, we can go, is this biblical? I'm not sure. Be very careful that it could be a sort of underlying racism in some cases where we just don't recognize a difference is not an evil, it's a difference. But you can chalk that up to ignorance. We're not always being bad. Does that make sense? But again, I do want to talk about racism next time and how the Bible actually analyzes it. Let's just end with this, and then we'll have some time for fellowship. The biblical case against critical theory. Here are just some passages that I want us to consider. We can come back to these next time. But this is really important. Leviticus 19:5. Now, this is the Mosaic Law, but I do think that it has a general moral theme behind it that is true to the New Testament as well. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. Don't give partiality to the poor just in virtue of the fact that they're poor. Now, we need to care about the poor. Of course, that doesn't mean don't care about the poor. It means don't give unjust partiality to the poor. Critical theory gives unjust partiality to the poor. We look at the class row, and the poor always have, should always be given the cultural advantage over the capitalist, because the capitalist is always oppressing the poor. That's why we're hearing so much about socialism now. Where the heck did socialism come from? Didn't we beat those guys? Wasn't there a world war about that or something? Well, no, it's back because of critical theory. And so, no, don't romanticize poverty. I want to skip to Ephesians 2, and this is so important. This is the problem with critical theory and the real solution to these inequalities that we find. Paul says this, Ephesians 2:14 through 16, he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man, some translations say one new humanity, or one new race, in place of the two, so making peace and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. In the gospel, these walls of hostility and these walls of division that we have created for ourselves all throughout human history, they might be racial, they might be classist, they might be cultural, all sorts, men and women, of course, as well, are broken down in Jesus Christ so that there can be true fellowship, so that there can be true brotherhood, sisterhood, in ways that are shocking to the world. Because the world operates, according to some degree, critical theory isn't the craziest idea, in some degree, to these power dynamics. That's not how the church operates, or at least that's not how the church should operate. And if the church is operating that way, we need to clean house. But the church is a radically different kind of community altogether. It's a radically different kind of place where these walls of division are broken down, and somebody should come into the church and say, how are all of these people of totally different age groups, friends, kids, and elderly, talking to each other? I've never seen a kid, they'd be out of here. They'd never be in a place like this, but they seem to love it. And people of different ethnic backgrounds, and men and women treating each other with genuine respect and care. You don't see this very often. That ought to be the way it should be if outsiders were to come in. That ought to be the testimony that we have because of things like what Paul is teaching in Ephesians 2. If we follow the critical theory model, what we do is we recognize these power dynamics and we reverse them, but we never get rid of them. We endorse the power dynamics as long as you're woke, and if you have a big negative score here, you shut your mouth and take the abuse. I don't think that's going to heal anything. Does that make sense? Well, let's close with that. Sorry, I started a bit late, my fault, and I went a little long, but any last comments or questions? Because this is hot stuff. This ain't easy. But any thoughts or questions or comments or pushback and we can pick up next time. All right, sorry, I went right up to the end. So shalom to you, and let's have a little time for fellowship.